He was born in a time of kings and chaos, destined for greatness, crowned by war, and feared across kingdoms. The firstborn son of Edward III, he should have worn England's crown. Instead, he died 1 year before his father. His dad would remember him not as a ruler, but as a warrior cloaked in black, a prince who never ascended the throne. Edward of Woodstock, known to us as the Black Prince. He was the thunder of and the shadow over Poitiers. His enemies called him merciless. His allies called him England's hope. But in the pages of history, he became something rarer, a legend, one forged in blood, duty, in the chivalric code. This is the story of a man who might have changed everything had death not claimed him first. What if England's greatest king never ruled at all? What if the Black Prince had lived? This is not just a biography, it's a portrait of what might have been and the legacy of a crown that never found its head. Edward of Woodstock was born on June 15, 1330, in the royal palace at Woodstock. The son of King Edward III and Queen Philippa of Hainaut, he was heir to a kingdom struggling to find its footing. England had just emerged from years of misrule under his grandfather, Edward II. A new era was beginning, and with it, a new hope for the throne. From his earliest days, Edward was raised not with comfort, but with purpose. Tutors and knights trained him in languages, governance, and warcraft. He learned Latin, French, theology, and, above all, the art of leadership. His father, Edward III, believed a prince must earn respect, not demand it. Even as a child, the Black Prince bore himself with quiet resolve. He was tall, strong, and fiercely intelligent. The court whispered that he looked like a king already, long before he had proven anything. But soon, war would offer him the chance to show England who he truly was. By the time Edward was a boy of 7, his father had launched the 100 Years' War against France, claiming the French crown through his mother's lineage. The war would dominate Edward's entire life. England needed warriors, not just kings, and young Edward was being prepared to be both. He studied the failures and victories of his ancestors. He watched his father rally nobles, manage dissent, and command armies. More than a scholar, Edward became a strategist. The court began to admire the boy's maturity, his calculated temperament, and his quiet determination. By age 16, Edward was ready. The battle that would define him in England was just ahead. He would not merely attend it, he would ride at its very center. The fate of the crown and its legacy would soon be soaked in blood. The fields near ran red with French blood. On August 26, 1346, Edward fought beside his father at one of the most decisive English victories of the war. Though only 16, the prince fought like a veteran, commanding a division and refusing to flee when the fighting grew fierce. When he was unhorsed and surrounded, messengers rushed to the king for aid, but Edward III refused to send help. "Let the boy win his spurs," he said. "He shall have the honor of the day." And so he did, standing his ground, rallying his men, and helping win a battle that crippled French morale. In the aftermath, England did not just gain land, it gained a hero. The young prince was hailed across Europe, his armor blackened by smoke and blood. Some say, even painted black in mourning, gave rise to his moniker, the Black Prince. Curie, it was followed by triumph and Calais and new prestige for the prince. Edward was knighted and celebrated across England. Curie, but behind the glory lay expectation. Curie, the people now looked to him not just as a warrior, but as the future king. The court praised his composure. His rivals feared his calm confidence. While other nobles played politics, Edward remained focused on duty. He studied statecraft, listened in council, and understood the burdens of rule. He was not just the king's son, he was the king's shadow, but shadows often hide pain. The war dragged on. The Black Death struck Europe, killing millions. Edward witnessed death on battlefields and in the streets of London. In such times, leadership was not measured by power, but by poise, and Edward had it. At 25, Edward was sent to command his own campaign through southern France. A brutal, scorched earth strategy called A. He cut a path through the countryside, pillaging supplies, disrupting trade, and forcing the French to engage him in open battle. In September 1356, at Poitiers, the French obliged. Their king, John II, led the charge. Despite being outnumbered, Edward outmaneuvered the French with brilliant tactics, including feigned retreats and hidden archers. The result? A second stunning English victory. More shocking still, Edward captured the French king alive. He treated John with honor, dining with him, offering him comfort. For this, even enemies respected the prince. He was not just a conqueror, he was chivalry personified. Edward returned to England a legend, with 2 historic victories and a captured French monarch under his belt. He seemed unstoppable, but the crown, though close, remained just out of reach. Edward III still ruled, and the prince's health began to wane. At court, Edward was praised by all, but envied by some. His favor with the people made him a political threat to others. Yet Edward avoided factionalism. He married Joan of Kent, a union of love more than strategy, rare among royals. Still, his grip on the future tightened. Parliament, the people, and even foreign powers believed he would become the most powerful monarch in Europe. But fate had begun whispering a different tale. In 1362, Edward was given control over Aquitaine, a vast territory in southwestern France. At first, he ruled with fairness and might, building alliances and enforcing justice. But the political complexities of the region began to wear him down. Local nobles resisted his taxation. The climate, unfamiliar and humid, affected his health. His decision to intervene in a Spanish conflict, supporting Pedro of Castile, would prove costly. The war drained his treasury and sapped his strength. Worse still, disease had begun to take hold. His body weakened, his energy faded. The mighty Black Prince, once the terror of France, now moved slower, coughed more often, and disappeared from court more frequently. By 1371, Edward could barely ride a horse. His face grew gaunt, his once powerful voice hollow. Physicians tried everything, poultices, prayers, relics. Nothing worked. Illness, likely dysentery or cancer, became a slow executioner. He returned to England, relinquishing his claim over Aquitaine. But he remained politically active, defending the rights of Parliament and guiding his young son, Richard, toward kingship. Even dying, Edward held more influence than most living nobles. The man, once crowned with laurel and steel, now wore a shroud of pain, and yet he never lost his dignity. Even in suffering, the Black Prince remained composed, noble, and fiercely aware of the legacy he would leave behind. In June of 1376, Edward of Woodstock died in Westminster Palace at the age of 45. The kingdom mourned, for this was not merely the death of a prince, it was the death of a dream. He was buried in Canterbury Cathedral beneath a black canopy, his armor suspended above his tomb as if he were only resting before another campaign. The Black Prince had lived with honor, fought with brilliance, and ruled with restraint, but he would never be crowned. His final wish was that his effigy bear the Latin phrase, "Here lies the Black Prince, whom everyone ought to imitate." Even in death, he called others to virtue, but the weight of succession now passed to his 10-year-old son, Richard II, a child unprepared for the trials of kingship. England had lost not only a hero, but its best hope for a stable future. Richard II became king at the age of 10, guided by the memory of a father he barely knew. The Black Prince had tried to prepare him, but the boy faced immense pressure. Surrounded by ambitious uncles and feuding nobles, Richard was vulnerable to manipulation. The strength of his father's reputation became both shield and shadow. Nobles often asked, what would the Black Prince have done? But Richard was not his father. He lacked the steel. He lacked the fire. And soon he would lose the crown. As England spiraled toward rebellion and tyranny, many believed that had Edward lived, the Wars of the Roses and centuries of bloodshed might never have happened. Court. The greatest king that never was became the ghost that haunted everyone that followed. Edward's death left a chasm in the Plantagenet dynasty, with his brothers vying for influence and his son too young to command respect. Cracks began to form in the royal foundation. The unity forged on French fields faded in the halls of Westminster. Factions split the court. Ambitions grew unchecked. The legacy of chivalry gave way to greed, and the balance of power shifted violently. The strong hand of the Black Prince, once capable of guiding lords and calming storms, was gone. From this fracture would rise the seeds of civil war, of York and Lancaster, of white, rose, and red. A kingdom once filled with promise now teetered on the edge of dynastic collapse, all for the absence of a single man. Had Edward of Woodstock survived his illness and outlived his father, he would have become King Edward IV, ascending the throne in 1377. A seasoned warrior, skilled diplomat, and beloved leader. His reign might have reshaped England entirely, would the peasants' revolt of 1381 have occurred under his strong leadership? Would the conflict with France have ended sooner or turned to lasting peace? Might England have avoided the tyranny of Richard II and the rise of the Lancasters altogether? Historians argue endlessly over what might have been, but the truth remains. Edward's death changed everything. Sometimes a man's greatest impact lies in what he never had the chance to do. No figure better embodied the chivalric code than the Black Prince. Honor, loyalty, courage, these were not just words to him. They were principles lived out on battlefields and in courtrooms, in how he treated enemies and how he bore defeat. He dined with captured kings, spared towns from massacre, and rewarded bravery on both sides of war. To him, being a knight was about more than combat. It was about character. He was the sword and the soul of England. Even his enemies respected him. French chroniclers, who loathed the English cause, praised Edward's nobility, the century of brutality. He stood apart, not as a flawless man, but as one who never stopped striving to be better than the times in which he lived. After his death, the Black Prince became more than a man. He became a myth. Poets and chroniclers cast him as England's last true knight. His black armor, his lion banner, his victories, all passed into legend. He was the prince who had done everything except rule. His tomb effigies, stained glass windows, and church murals carried his likeness for generations. Kings invoked his name to rally troops. Rebels claimed to fight in his spirit. Even Shakespeare mentioned him as the father of a king and the ghost of a better age. And yet, myth carries danger. It obscures flaws, erases failures. Edward was not perfect. He waged brutal wars. He upheld a feudal system. Perhaps that's what makes his story so compelling. He was mortal and still so near to greatness. Edward of Woodstock never wore a crown, yet he shaped a kingdom. His victories altered the course of the 100 Years' War. His values redefined kingship. His death destabilized a dynasty. His absence rewrote history. What we remember is not only what he did, but what he could have done. And in that void, in that aching absence, lies a story more powerful than many kings who did rule. He reminds us that history is not just made by those who win the crown, but by those who should have. He was called the Black Prince, but he was England's brightest light. And in the shadow of the crown he never wore, he remains one of history's most haunting figures, the greatest king that never was. If you have made it this far, you have journeyed through the rise, glory, and loss of one of the most remarkable lives in medieval history. Edward, the Black Prince, fought like a legend, lived like a leader, and died like a man robbed of destiny. History does not always reward greatness. Sometimes it buries it in tombs, leaves it written in stone, and lets centuries pass before remembering. But through stories like this, greatness returns for just a moment to be seen again. Like this video if you believe some legends deserve to be told. Share your thoughts below. What might have changed if the Black Prince had lived? Subscribe for more powerful, untold stories from history's forgotten corners.